everyone, and welcome to another Scots Whay Hae podcast. And today I'm joined by musician and writer Katy Lironi to talk about her book Matilda In The Middle, which is published with Into Books. Hello, Katy.
Hello, Ali.
So, how do you describe Matilda In The Middle to people when they ask, "Oh, you've got a book out"?
Haha. Well, there's a good question to start with. How do I describe it? Well, it's definitely a family memoir, I think, first and foremost. And it is a book of two sides. It's definitely steeped in music, steeped in family, but obviously we've got, the title, Matilda in the Middle. So as the rest of my five children say, not the rest of my five children, five in total, say, she's your favourite. So, well, she gets her name in the middle. You didn't want your names anywhere near it. So.
But that's an interesting point, actually, because it's not just your memoir, it is a family memoir.
Yeah.
And I guess the reality of it being published and us talking about it is different from, I'm going to be writing a book. The reality is probably something quite...
Yeah, the reality of it actually coming out is very different from sitting in your kitchen or wherever it was that I've been writing it over many, many, many years, because some of it has come from very much from diaries and recollections and things that I'd maybe written quite a long time ago. So it's when I say it's a family memoir, yes, in subject it's a family memoir, but it's very, very much, and as I've said to them all, it's my memories. You all have your own memories. They are not going to be the same as mine, but this is how I saw it, and that goes right back to my own childhood and my own formative years, and then the second side of the book, which is very much about having my own family and the influence. I mean, music is the overarching theme of the whole thing. So it's the influence that music has had on me, on us as a family, and then quite specifically on Matilda, who has Down syndrome, and how she accesses music and what a pivotal role it's played and continues to play in her life.
It's interesting you say it's a book of two sides, which it is, reflecting an album, and it's got tracks named for every chapter. But it's not as simple, I don't think, as saying, well, the first chapter is music and the second chapter is family. It all mixes in together, isn't it? It's absolutely inseparable.
Yes, it is. It's enmeshed, and that editing process was the thing that I found the hardest. The writing, no, that's absolutely fine. That comes quite easily, and you can just write, but then you've got to think, but what's the shape of this, and what's the narrative of this, and where does that fit? So that's not fun.
And on the cover, I think I certainly took note of it this morning when I was doing some preparation for this, and it does say family music mayhem. So can you talk a bit about each of those and how that kind of breaks out? I guess they merge into each other as well.
I can't talk about family without the last one. Well, I mean, obviously, the whole point of it being about music is that music was very important in my life growing up. And everyone of a certain era has got lots of the same touchstones, I think. But especially with my brothers being very musical, and I was more an enjoyer of music and a willing participant when I was younger. But then ending up, obviously marrying one of their best friends who just so happened to be a musician. So, me and Douglas together, we have done a lot musically, and a lot of the stuff that we've done musically, well, we were in a band as soon as we met, so the Secret Goldfish, but then once the children came along, and same old story happens with everyone, but life really becomes rather busy and rather different, and the opportunities to do what you once did become a little bit harder to eke out and to find. But one of the things that we did manage to do together was to create Sandfest, which was a fundraising concert that we ran annually for 10 years, and that was raising money for Down syndrome charities. So that was a really great outlet for us because we were living rurally by that time. You know, we'd moved from Glasgow with the kids into rural Lanarkshire, and we just brought Sandfest to our little rural village, and that was, you know, that was as much about, you know, creating a forum to raise money, and it was always for World Down Syndrome Day, so we always raised money around this time of year, and had this great, you know, concert just with, you know, it was just, you know, our friends, Douglas's friends, his musician friends, and the Bluebells were a, you know, a big main part of that. But, you know, there were so many that were a big main part of it. You know, James Grant was a big part of it, and Justin Curry was a big part of it, and Graham Skinner was a big part of it. So, you know, everyone there who came and willingly helped year on year, and we raised all this money, but also it gave us a musical outlet because we played as well.
Yeah.
And the kids were always part of it. So some of the photos I look back and I'm like, how am I actually standing on that stage with a child wrapped around my legs, you know, while we're performing? But they were a part of it, and they grew up being a part of it. So that was a really nice thing to be able to bring that into it. And yeah, it was chaotic, but it was fun.
We'll talk a bit about the music side of things that yourself and Douglas have continued to do. I mean, you say time got tighter and tighter, but you still managed to have, you know, a lot of irons in the fire. But Sandfest is particularly interesting. When did you decide that this was something that you wanted to do, and how did you even approach it?
Yeah, we didn't. So it happened completely accidentally. The 5 children were born all fairly swiftly, one after the other. So in 6.5 years, suddenly, you know, we had 5 of them, and the last 2 were twins. And Matilda, who is in the middle, not just in the title of the book, but she is in the middle of the family, she was 2.5 when the twins came along. So for each of the children, we had, you know, just like a welcome to the world party. And the twins, we weren't quite ready to do that till they were about 6 months old, because life was just so chaotic at that point. So they were born in October 2006, and it got round towards World Down Syndrome Day 2007. We were like, why don't we just, you know, put everything together and have a welcome to the world for the twins, a celebration of World Down Syndrome Day, and it was my eldest daughter's 7th birthday as well. So all 3 things. Well, let's do that. Let's raise money. That all sounds good. That'll be fine. So we booked out our village hall, which is where we would do anything that we were organising. Booked out our lovely Sanford Village Hall, and then on the day of the party, I took the twins for their usual morning walk to get them off to sleep, to have a wee bit of quietness, and it was a beautiful day like this, as I look out the window in the beautiful March sunshine, freezing, but beautiful March sunshine. And our village hall is quite a dark little village hall, and I just thought, we're going to have to change this. I want this party outdoors. All these children are going to be there. I know the bands will be playing. It'll be really lovely, but it'll be really nice if we're all just outdoors. So we did manage to make that happen, and it did mean, you know, quite spontaneously setting up, you know, amps and PA and all the rest of it at the bottom of the garden, just on a little bit of decking we had, and everybody came. It did get rather chilly towards late afternoon, I must admit, but it was really, really lovely, and we just had, you know, all this lovely music, all these families, all these children around, and at the end of the night we had Ken McCluskey from the Bluebells up on the garden fence. Matilda keeps saying he was up on the garden shed. It's like, well, he was kind of leaning on the shed. He wasn't quite teetering on top of the shed, but he was up in the garden shed, and, you know, the sun was setting, and it was just really beautiful. And at the end of the last song, he said, you know, thanks for coming, everybody, and we'll see you at Sandfest next year. and that was it. That's all it took.
And you felt you had to get
it. We kind of had to do it, and I can remember standing watching it, and I can remember turning to Douglas, and I was like, Sandfest, what do you think? And that was it. The seed was sown. So we held it then every year for 10 years. I mean, we eventually the last one was now 2 years ago,
right? And
obviously we had a big break during COVID,
of course.
But we held it annually in our Sanford Village Hall, raised thousands of pounds for Down syndrome charities, And then for our 10th anniversary, we took it to the Royal Concert Hall. So we went from a hall which had a capacity of at the most 200. We squeezed far too many.
It really is a small hall.
Yeah, I mean, really, maybe 150, but we would have 200, 250 in there every year. And then we went to, 2,000 capacity Royal Concert Hall, and we managed, and everyone who was there agrees with this, but we managed to bring the same atmosphere to the Royal Concert Hall, which was quite an amazing thing. And we got a lot more of, the Down syndrome community came, so they were all down at the front and just having a brilliant time. So that was a great thing to do, but it was so exhausting we didn't touch it again for 5 years because there was just so much involved in running a gig of that size.
And it must have felt like this is almost a pinnacle,
Yes.
How do you top that?
It did a little bit. And we did it for a specific reason. It was the World Down Syndrome Congress is held in a different city every 3 years, and it was being held in Glasgow. And I worked for Down Syndrome Scotland, so I was going to be part of that congress, but there was a lot of money needed to be raised towards hosting that. So that's what we did. That's what we did with Sandfest. We raised £50,000 for that, which was great. But yeah, it was time to step back. So after COVID, we came back with it in 2023, and that was up at the Straven Hotel, where we now run Frets.
Yeah.
But we did a Sandfest up there, which again was just another great night. A great night. And that was one of the sort of first outings, the first performances for Choir 21.
Well, because as we speak, World Down Syndrome Day is this Friday coming.
Yes, 21st of March. Yeah.
And we've got, obviously because I'm going to be involved as well, but you've got a book event at the Book Nook in Stewarton as part of that.
Yes.
And as part of that is Choir 21. So perhaps you could talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, so Choir 21 is, it's a Makaton choir that I set up. I set it up locally prior to the lockdown of 2020. So I'd set it up locally kind of as a thing for myself to do and for Matilda to do. Because I thought she was needing another wee activity. So we set up a choir in Straven, and we just had local people joining in, but also quite a few members with Down syndrome came along on a Sunday afternoon, and we signed to songs. So Makaton is a signed communication system, similar to British Sign Language, but simplified for people with a learning disability or a communication need. So we had that running from about the January to the March 2020, and we had our inaugural gig set up to support the Bluebells at the Straven Hotel, who were playing on the 20th of March 2020, which was such an inauspicious date, which we didn't know at the time. And as that week went on and it got closer and closer and closer to the 20th of March, we realised that gig wasn't going to take place.
Right, yeah, of course.
Lockdown happened on that Friday. That's when we were all locked down. So unfortunately, Choir 21 missed their big outing, their big support gig, and it's such a difficult thing to explain to people who just have a different understanding of what's going to happen. Matilda really being the one who was like, well, it's on my calendar, so I'm going to Straven Hotel. This is happening. So trying to explain all of that was quite hard. So Choir 21 kind of came to a little bit of a standstill, but as that, terrible time of lockdown continued, I found a different way of incorporating Choir 21, and I managed to incorporate it into my job and run it through my work at Down Syndrome Scotland, and it became an online Makaton choir. Right. So that's now been running for 5 years, and it's gone from strength to strength. We've now got 2 weekly choirs that run online. So we've got about between 30 to 40 young people who come every week and rehearse online. And then out of our performance that we did at Sandfest in 2023, came quite a number of offers to perform live. So that's been a really great bonus and a really lovely thing to see the young people performing and growing in confidence and actually opening up a new world to different audiences. They performed with me at my book launch in Mono in October, and people there who had no idea about Down syndrome, about Makaton, and were really blown away with it, which was lovely. So it'll be very nice to have. We're going to have a slimmed down version of Choir 21 perform at Stewarton, and it'll be a nice little bespoke choir doing our usual Scottish set. So looking forward to that.
Having been there at your book launch in Mono, it's a really charismatic performance. The personalities just going to jump off stage. I would also say it's quite difficult to follow.
Yes,
I felt a bit like the Who going, we can't follow Jimi Hendrix, all you do. But because everyone's just kind of enraptured by what they see on stage.
Yes.
It's really quite special. And you should say that you're going to be at the Paisley Book Festival on the 27th of April. And Choir 21 are going to be there as well. So if you've missed them at Stewarton, there's an opportunity to catch everything there.
And I think we'll be doing a wee bit of, I think we're going to do a wee bit of sort of interaction and teaching. And the choir love nothing more than passing on their skills because they're good at what they do. So they'll be teaching some Makaton to the audience on the 27th,
So going back to the book, and we say that music runs through it, and it just occurred to me, did you listen to music as you wrote?
No, I find that quite confusing because some elements of multitasking I'm good at, others not so. So not specifically, no. Or if I did, you just zone it out because you need to be so, or I do. I need to be quite immersed in what I'm doing and what I'm writing.
I was talking to David Belcher similarly, and he said, no, when I'm listening to music, I'm listening to music. It's not music and in the background, it's something I really concentrate on, and it's the same in writing.
Yeah, pretty much like that. And we've just recently managed to get in, our sort of turntable set up and have all the vinyl out, and it's really nice to have it we're trying desperately to find a place in this house that we can have it, that we can listen to it on our own. Me and Douglas, as opposed to all the kids. So we've eventually just set it up in our own, in our own room, and it's like, we can actually just lie down and listen to music as opposed to it's just on in the background. So yeah, that's quite nice.
So you said the book came about from kind of diary entries or things that you noted down. Were they always meant to be published? And if not, when did you decide that, this is something that could be coherent? I think
I had always written. So it wasn't new for me to be writing. It was I'd, like a lot of things, I just hadn't found the time to do it. But I had always written, and I was much more so, before the children came along, would, contribute to, anthologies and literary magazines and things like that. And I was quite good at doing it. And I suppose I had reached a stage, or the children had reached a stage where I thought, actually, I need to start doing a bit more of that again because I'm missing it, and that would be good to do. And a lot of it kind of centred around writing things that were kind of being, going online, or writing things that ended up online. And I thought, well, if I'm happy to have this out there online, and that's quite a public forum, it would be really nice. And a few people, so I'd written things seemed quite separate. I'd written, stuff about the family, but then I'd also written, I was really inspired by reading the Tracy Thorn Bedsit, Disco Queen. And I was like, I love these, recollections and these stories. And obviously, she's a, she's a person, she's a somebody, and she had all these great stories to tell. But I loved the way it was written, and it just took me back to a lot of and I remember just staying up really quite late through the night after reading it, and just writing recollections stuff, and that stayed there for a good 10 years on my laptop. Then I thought, actually, I could finish that, I could continue with that, because it was more just about childhood memories and things like that, and I could go on to talking about the bands that I was in, and bring it a wee bit more up to date. So I did that, and then that went on social media, and a number of people were like, I didn't know this, and why would they? I didn't know this, although the whole sort of 80s thing is having quite a resurgence. And a number of people were like, I look forward to reading the book. And you just think, okay, well, why not?
But it is interesting, because as you say, that kind of early 80s independent stuff. There's a lot being written about it, a lot being discovered that people didn't know at the time. I mean, I thought I kind of knew a lot of the indie bands at the time, but then you realise there was so much more going on. So what was your kind of early experiences of kind of finding your own music? I mean, you say you got two brothers who were into their music. Originally, were you kind of their musical taste foisted upon you?
Yeah, definitely. I think that happens whatever, if you're the youngest in a family, that probably does really happen. And I was the youngest for 14 years until my sister came along, and, we were kind of all heading off to live our own lives by that time. So she got to probably kind of form her own musical identity more than I did. But I mean, that wasn't a bad thing, mainly in the main, I suppose, my brother's stuff, because a lot of it was just, the early glam stuff that was around in the 70s. So there was a lot of Sweet and a lot of Slade and a lot of T-Rex and all of that stuff. And then, I mean, my mum and dad were also very into music, so they had all the old 78s lying around, so we listened to all that stuff, and there was a lot of jazz around. And I was probably 5 or 6 when I bought my first single, so that was definitely my own choice.
Yeah.
Nobody had any.
Yeah.
Because if I'd said I was going to buy, Jimmy Osmond, Long Hair Lover from Liverpool, they wouldn't have let me. But of course I did buy that, so that's what I bought. But a lot of their hand-me-downs, came to me. But, there was some heavy rock stuff in there that I was never into. There was Led Zeppelin, there was Pink Floyd, there was all of that stuff around. And then, I just intermingled that with lots of stuff that my mum and dad had lying around, all the sort of Peggy Lee and Frank Sinatra
And because I've been watching them on a Friday night fairly regularly, the golden age of Top of the Pops. So you did get quite a musical education every Thursday night.
I mean, it was very eclectic, and everybody sat down and watched it, as a family.
Yeah.
And you would never miss it. Same with the chart rundown. It was inbuilt.
But you eventually decided you were going to go to Edinburgh to study, but was that also a kind of escape and the attempt to kind of find out who you were rather than being identified along with siblings?
I think, in retrospect, you could look at it that way, but I would never have chosen to leave home because I just wasn't ready. As a, newly turned 18-year-old, and I think some people are absolutely, they're desperate to get away. And I wasn't. I was probably a real home bird, quite painfully shy and not really ready to step out with that, that comfort zone. So I didn't get into study English at Strathclyde, and I was, utterly crestfallen because that's the only thing I was interested in was English.
Right.
So, I got my sort of, top grade that you can get for English, but everything else was not top grade. So that meant at the end of the day that you don't get in. So I missed it by something ridiculous. And that was my fallback, and I'm so glad that my fallback is what happened. In retrospect, I am really, really glad, because if I'd gone to study English at Strathclyde, there would have been no reason for me to leave home, and that would have been 4 years of living at home in EK, which was not the most exciting place, I have to say. Although there was a lot of music going on, would I have found it? I don't think so.
That's an interesting point, because now we look at what was going on at the time in a lot of the new towns, and East Kilbride in particular, and think, wow, it was, every street had a Jesus Mary chain or an Aztec camera walking down it. But if you're in it, you probably don't get to...
No, I mean, I think for me, definitely, as you said, going away and finding my own identity, because for me, it felt like there was a real East and West divide at that point.
Right.
And because I went to Edinburgh, and it was just that wee bit after, the fire engines and fast product and all that kind of stuff, it was that next step. It was all the wee brothers and wee sisters. Then it was a whole new thing, and it was, what became known as C86. It was actually 1984 when I went there. But it definitely, and I think I'd say in the book, I just felt like this scene was there that I'd been waiting to discover, and it did feel like it. And people going about it being twee and blah blah blah, whatever you want to say, but it felt comfortable to me, and it felt like something that I could do and be part of, and it just all fell into place. It seemed like the most normal thing in the world.
And you went to Napier University, And what was the course again?
It was publishing.
Yeah. And so is that where you met the people that would be your future bandmates and all of that?
Yeah, and I mean, talking to them now since it's come out, obviously, everybody's timeline is different when things happen. Like, well, for me, it all happened in the first week, which of course it didn't, because for the first sort of 3 months of college, I came home in the middle of the week and I came home every weekend because I missed home so much. So I probably wasn't in a band in the first 3 months, but I'm pretty sure it was before Christmas. Maybe it was after the Christmas holidays. But really, pretty much, my friends in the publishing course, so we had publishing and we had printing, which were both sort of down in the basement of the Napier campus, one next door to the other. And within them, we had the members of the shop assistants and the Fizzbombs and Roke Capel and Jessie Garron and the Desperados. So it was just there. It was just there, and also all the clubs that everyone was going to, everyone all the clubs that you went to they were playing the Jesus and Mary chain. The Jesus and Mary chain were obviously, the pinnacle.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd come from East Kilbride. I didn't know who the Jesus and Mary chain were. I was like, oh, all right, okay. So, so I got an education in music, but also just the whole being immersed in it just happened.
And do you think, you talked about a kind of Edinburgh-Glasgow divide. Was that, and I've spoken to jazz musicians from that period, and they speak about a Glasgow and Edinburgh divide as well. But, so was it a musical divide? Was there something different going on in Glasgow? I sometimes feel that Postcard kind of almost overshadowed everything else that was going on in that city in particular. Do you think it was quite healthy that Edinburgh was doing its own thing in that way?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was. I'm really glad, and I'm really glad I ended up there at that time, because I think it worked. It worked for me. But it felt like there was a bit of a divide, and I suppose when you're immersed in where you're immersed, that's what your focus is on. But I mean, I think if you trace it back now, you can see where all the influences have come from. And I think probably the whole sort of Glasgow and postcardy type thing definitely had an influence as well over on our East Coast C86 thing. You can see that, but as did the more sort of probably more angular and post-punk type sounds, because there was a lot of there was a lot of fuzz, there was a lot of feedback. It was never just jangling or easy on the ear. So I think we had a lot of the really nice lots of girl vocals, lots of lovely harmonies and melodies, but underneath there was a lot of fuzz going on.
Yeah. I find that really interesting, how the different cities sound different, because I think in Glasgow there's always been, and the West Coast, there's always been this kind of really strong American influence coming around. You can see it in the way people looked and in the birds and all that kind of stuff, MC5. And I wonder, particularly after reading a couple of books about fast records and what was going on there, is that Edinburgh also had an influence from the north of England and Sheffield and what was going on there.
Yeah, and I found all that really interesting to read about in retrospect, because I was really quite unaware of it at the time. But reading about it, you can sort of see and you can see more of a line of where things came from and where different sounds came from, I suppose. But at the time, no, I was quite blissfully unaware and just doing my own thing.
And what was it like being in a band at that point? Because it would have been, I'm taking it, a small scene. We still, this today, we think about the Scottish music scene, a lot of people know each other, but back then, I guess, really pretty much everyone did know each other.
Yeah, and obviously, there's no social media. How do you find out about these things? Basically, you're going around fly posting and fanzines and word of mouth. I think there was a huge amount of word of mouth, and you're immersed in your own little scene. So you think maybe that things are bigger than they are. But that, saying that, we thought it was normal to have, NME and Melody Maker flying up to take photographs of us. That was just normal. It wasn't oh, this is happening. This is really exciting. It was exciting, but it was also, well, that just happens. Of course we're in the NME again. Why wouldn't we be? And that might just be for whatever it was. We had a single out, but whatever gigs we were doing, and because I think there was quite a lot of vibe about it, because it was such a niche scene of coming from Napier College, not just Napier College, but these two classes. Not everyone was in these two classes, but there was quite a majority of us in there. So I suppose there's something that you can create a scene out of.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think journalists are obviously looking for that, so they can bring in a few bands together and write about it. But it's like, Glasgow School of Art, nobody went to do art, they went to form a band and then kind of go on. Not true, but the mythology is always interesting. And we should say that the band you were in mainly was the Fizzbombs. Were you in others as well?
No, I was just in the Fizzbombs, but members of the Fizzbombs were in other bands. So I was the lead singer in the Fizzbombs. Margarita was the guitarist and backing singer, and she was also in Jessie Garen, and she was in Rote Capel, and my friend Anne, who was the bass player, she was also the drummer in the Shop Assistants. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of toing and froing around different bands, as was Angus, our drummer. He was in lots of different bands as well. Yeah.
And how long did this kind of scene last, or how long did the Fizzbombs last?
The Fizzbombs in its original incarnation lasted a really short length of time, because certainly I would have joined it halfway through my first year,
right?
If that, it might have been before that, but halfway through my first year, and I left when I left college after third year. So,
because when you're in it, that probably seems like quite a long time. But now again,
18,
looking back,
when you're 18, it seems like it went on forever.
Yeah.
And it seems like it was a really big, but it was a big part of that 3 years, and that 3 years was really formative. Between 18 to 21 is such a formative part of your life, especially when you've left home. And it was a big part of being at college, because it was, every week you were rehearsing. Every week it felt like you had a gig.
Yeah.
That felt like you did. And then we had a little British tour just before Anne and I left. And we left really because we did then go on to study English at Strathclyde University. We went on to do a postgrad. And we just thought, well, it's time to leave. So
yeah. But you kept on making music. So did you return to Glasgow to go to Strathclyde? Was that the kind of main reason for doing it?
Yeah. We both got into the same sort of postgrad. We both initially wanted to go and study English, and that's what we both ended up doing. We just did a postgrad in English literature, and then so we left. Anne left. I'm pretty sure she left. Yeah, she left behind her bands as well, the Shop Assistants and the Fizzbombs. So we left those behind, and that was that. And then we just went off. We went off travelling together for a few years, and we did maybe silly little bits and pieces, but nothing very much until we found ourselves back in Glasgow. And
I've asked you about musical influences before, but considering you studied English, who are your writer? Who influences you as a writer?
I am. When I was in fifth or sixth year, my fifth or sixth year English teacher, would be fifth year, introduced me to Sylvia Plath, to the poetry of Sylvia Plath. So I studied her at school, and then I went on when I did my postgrad in English. That's who I did my dissertation on. So I just absolutely loved her poetry, and I've always really enjoyed poetry, and I love Liz Lockhead, and we did a lot of Liz Lockhead when we were at Strathclyde, and we did in Scottish literature and contemporary literature and poetry. So a lot of the Scottish writers, and just quite a lot of, I'm really bad at actually answering questions like that, because I just read quite widely and then don't quite remember. But in terms of poetry,
was poetry a big? That was a
especially when I was younger and I had more time to immerse myself in it a little bit, I think. But I just and short stories and literature.
because there's poetry in the book.
There is.
I looked through that just to suddenly go, have I misremembered that? But there is poetry in the book.
Have I imagined that? Yeah, I mean, that was what I would have written. That's probably where I would have where I started writing was poetry, and nobody wants to revisit their teenage poems. I don't think anyone
I guess
does.
That's true. Not even Sylvia Plath wants to do it.
I don't know if anyone wants to revisit those. That's something that I have continued throughout the years, and obviously it's a wee bit more immediate. you can get something down, and sometimes that's just all you need. You need to rein yourself in and make something as sparse as you can to say what it is that you need to say.
So you've been away travelling, and you come back, and how do you get to the stage where you're making music with again? I was away for a number of years teaching English and just travelling around a wee bit, and Anne and I were off there doing that together, which was great fun. And then we both found ourselves back living in Glasgow. We were sharing a flat and working in Waterstones in Union Street. Right.
And that's where Douglas made a reappearance. So Douglas McIntyre, who I eventually married, was my brother's old bandmate and friend. So yeah, he came into Waterstones searching for some gamekeeper books and books about birds and all this wildlife stuff that he's very interested in. So we met there, ended up going out, and pretty much as soon as we started going out, formed a band, because he had been, a session musician for lots of different people, and had just found himself, back home in Glasgow as well, and looking for new projects. And I was like, I'd really like to, be in a band again. It's been a few years now, and that would be really great. So that just worked so easily. Yeah. Because I don't play an instrument, obviously Douglas does, so having the, person right there that you can just make up melodies and tunes and things, and songs just appeared really easily and quickly, so that was good.
And was that the Secret Goldfish?
And that was the Secret Goldfish, yeah. So we had my brother Graham on bass, and Anne's boyfriend Paul, who had been the drummer in the Mackenzies. He was our drummer, so it all just fell together.
And again, had some success, videos on television, and got a lot of coverage. Again,
I mean, obviously nothing just happens, but the Secret Goldfish was born at the same time as Creeping Bent. Yes. Douglas's record label that is just in its final 30th year. So the Secret Goldfish was synonymous with that, and all born at the same time. So it was great to have an independent record label, our own thing that, is a conduit for not only putting out our music, but all this great stuff going on, not just in Glasgow, but, everywhere, to be able to work with lots of people, but also then we were able to put on gigs, so you're able to just be part of that scene. But yeah, we did a lot in the years that we were releasing and creating music.
And there is new music coming?
There is. It's been 25 years.
I'm surprised.
I'm surprised. I'm so surprised that it's actually happening, because my second child is he'll be 24 later this year, and I was pregnant when we recorded some of it. So yeah, it's had a long gestation, this album. It's been there. It's just needed a bit of work and a bit of tweaking and a bit of mastering and getting it all sorted and done. But it is being released, and we've got we have a launch on the 22nd of June, I think I'm right in saying. So,
and where's that going to be?
That's going to be in the Glad Cafe, and the album is called Empty Holster.
Fantastic. And you mentioned the Frets gigs that you put on at Straven, and that's linked to Creeping Bent as well, isn't it?
Well, it's kind of a different thing. I mean, it's linked as in
it's the same
Douglas.
people.
Yeah, Douglas runs it, and we kind of run it as a family thing. But it's it's his concept, it's his idea, and again, it was to bring music to our local area, and we've got this beautiful venue, walking distance from where we live in Straven, and it just brings people It has been every month. We're now just trying sort of a different approach of it not being quite every month. But this weekend coming, we've got two sellout gigs. So getting the same artist to play over 2 nights is a great thing for the hotel. It's great for us. So we've got Butler, Blake and Grant playing this weekend. And yeah, that's been running since, again, just before COVID. So we'll have our 6th anniversary in October. And that's just, bringing music out here. And
it seemed to really be a case of if you build it, they will come, because people come from far and wide.
Oh, people come from America. I mean, it's amazing. Regularly people come up from down south, but we have some people fly over from different parts of Europe, from the States. So it is quite amazing, and it's been a really brilliant thing for the hotel as well, because, people, the rooms get booked out, the restaurant gets booked out, and people just learn about this little corner of Lanarkshire, which is actually really quite idyllic.
It is, absolutely. And you mentioned Creeping Bent there. Did you say it was the last year?
Yes,
that's for sure.
Yes. Douglas has put it in writing almost that it's the last year. Yeah, 30 years. It feels like a good round figure and we have this fantastic back catalogue.
Yeah.
So we're slowly selling off the back catalogue, and there will be a celebration party to mark the end of Creeping Bent.
Oh, wow. And, I mean, to keep that going for 30 years is quite incredible, particularly to go back to the mayhem family and music aspect. When you've got family as well, you manage to keep all these things kind of going.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Douglas will have a book out about this, which is great. I'm so glad he's managed again to find the time to document it, because I've read the proof, and there's so much about Creeping Bent which obviously I knew, but if you look at the timeline of Creeping Bent, it's 30 years old. Our eldest daughter is just about to turn 25, so I was only really actively participating and being quite a big part of that for the first 5 years, and then my time and energy was elsewhere, as was Douglas's. However, he managed to continue running that and working full time. So don't know what that tells you, but it's been quite a lot. So there was a lot of stuff there. I was like, well, I didn't know that. I didn't know your reason for doing that, or the underlying reason for this, and how it all links together. So it's really interesting. It's an interesting read.
I think interesting that you've got these books that you can probably swap over, and each of you will go, oh, really? You were thinking that at the time? I had no idea. And do the rest of the family share your love of music?
I thought you were going to say your love of books. I was like, yeah, I'm not sure they've read any of them, so that's quite good.
Okay, fair enough.
Music, yes. All quite different though, which I think is really great. And we never, I mean, when they were younger, the older two definitely did learn some instruments and played drums, and some of them did a bit of guitar, a bit of piano, and my daughter played the cello for a few years, but everyone let that go, and nobody really wanted to pursue it, and that's up to them. We didn't really push that much, because they've got to come to that themselves. So my eldest obviously she's taken up singing, so she's a singer, and Quad 90 is her project and band, along with her friend Naomi. So that's great to see her going off and doing that, and she loves the performing part of it. She really loves being in the studio, and she just finds it quite natural because she studied that at Riverside, so went off to do that. So that's where she feels comfortable, and that's what she enjoys doing, so that's great. Everyone else is more just they just enjoy it, and they definitely have their own, the boys are really into rave.
Right.
It's not something I really understand or have done, but that's what they are. Electronic music, that's their thing.
And we've seen Matilda on stage, I have, a couple of times as well.
Yeah, she absolutely loves, music is her main thing. Throughout the week, after she's been to college, if she could just spend her time doing musical pursuits, that's what she would love. So her Friday at the moment is spent doing Music All, which is a really lovely Glasgow-based charity, and they run out of their sessions that Matilda takes part in are held at Berkeley Studios in,
Oh, yeah.
in Glasgow, where, you know, if you're a touring band in Glasgow, that's where you are. So that's what she loves. And, you know, she just feels that she's part of that whole music scene. So she rehearses there on a Friday and she just writes screeds and screeds and screeds of songs all the time. I don't get to see many of them, and quite often they don't seem to be quite right, so she rips them out and puts them away, and I keep trying to say, you know, it takes writers a long time. You just keep your work in progress and look back on it. But that's what she loves, which is just great. And to be able to give her that, you know, stage to be able to perform as well has been really lovely for her.
It's really interesting. I've spoken to a lot of people whose parents have been involved in music in some way or another, and they think it's natural and it's not a big deal in that sense to be musicians or be involved in music themselves. That's not the case for everyone. Someone who's maybe mum and dad were in, you know, whatever it might be, banking or something like that, they've found it, you know, oh no, I'm doing something, I should get a job, and you know, that kind of thing.
Get a real job.
Yeah, that kind of, unfortunately, I mean, that can happen with a lot of things, if you know, if you sport or whatever. But it is interesting that people just say, oh, of course I did it. You know, I'm thinking of a musician called Lewis McLaughlin, whose two parents are both well-known musicians, and you know, it was almost like the opposite. It's like, no, don't do your studies. Get on the guitar, get on the piano.
I know.
Learn to play.
Exactly. But yeah, it's only been really Amelia and, you know, Matilda who have decided to do that.
And now the book's been out for a while. Has the way you view it changed at all?
Oh, I suppose, I mean, it's quite a weird thing to talk about something that you've written. That's an unusual thing. Because, you know, as anyone who writes would tell you, it's, you know, it's by its very nature, it's a very solitary thing. And you don't envisage then talking about it. So that's a little bit different. I haven't actually read it in its book form. Sorry, I should stop clapping my hands in front of that microphone. I haven't actually read it in its book form, and I just want to give it more space. So probably in the summer, I would quite like to do that and feel a wee bit removed from it. And because once you've done all the editing process and you just, you know, you're constantly looking for things that are wrong. So
that's true. Yes,
it's a weird one, but it's lovely to have it as an artifact. And I think, you know, Into Books and Stephen did such a great job of it.
It's a great cover, yeah.
So I really love the cover, and Matilda loves that that's her there. So now I'm just, you know, I'm just really pleased it's out there.
And the response, have you been surprised at all, or, you know, is anything kind of thought, oh, I never would have thought of that? Because other people will interpret it in such a different way, especially when it's so personal. Yeah,
sometimes people are a wee bit like, oh, you know, how could you write that? How could you say that? And I suppose what I'm saying is, I've also just chosen to write what I'm okay with. There's I didn't write everything. Of course I didn't write everything, you know, and I also asked, I didn't ask all of them, I have to say, but I did ask Matilda about a few things, and there was quite a bit of editing went on just at that very final stage, because really some of it, you know, is her words and verbatim, and she has to be happy for me to, you know, to put that across. But for you know, the rest of the family, I have very much explained this is not your story, but it's how I remember it.
Well, Katy, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I think it's a brilliant book, and I've read it a few times now, and each time I think I can read this a different way, I can get different things from it, and I go back to that family, music and mayhem, and the way it just all kind of becomes one story in a sense.
Well, thank you very much. That is really lovely to hear.
And we'll be back soon with someone completely different. Cheers.